All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Teresa. So I will now go through an example for the disbursement request form, and then we'll take a look at the VC fund obligation template. So on screen now, you should be seeing an Excel workbook. An Excel workbook will be customized for each of the participating jurisdictions and available for download on the reporting portal. So I'll go through this generally here first and then into each tab for specifics. So there are several tabs in the workbook here. First is the cover page, then tooltips. There are 3 tabs for your specific transactions: CAP transactions, loan credit, OCSP transactions, VC equity transactions, and then 2 tabs for administrative costs, one for general administrative costs, and then one for fees paid to the VC fund portfolio companies. So starting with the cover page here, this will be locked. All of the cells will not be editable on the cover page, and this is really for your use. Once you start filling out the rest of the workbook, these totals will sum up for you, and you'll be able to see the total and summary information of all of the transaction information you've entered in the workbook so far. So the information that is covered here is the participating jurisdiction's name, the date of their executed allocation agreement, and then your funds disbursed. In this example that I'm showing today, I have a workbook that is for a 3rd tranche disbursement request. So this participating jurisdiction has already gone through one of their reviews. If this is your first time going through a disbursement review and you're coming in for your 2nd tranche, you would only see the funds disbursed in tranche 1 populated with data. Funds disbursed in tranche 2 would be 0 still. Items 12, 13, 14, and 15 here are all calculated from the information regarding your transactions in the following tabs. Total expended, obligated, and transferred will be calculated across your program transactions. Total administrative costs will come from that administrative cost tab, and line 14 here will be the VC fees. Line 15 shows your total EOT, including the admin and VC fees, and this is what will count towards your overall EOT percentage. To be eligible for disbursement, as mentioned, if you're coming in for your 2nd tranche review, you'll need to be above 80%, and that will show green on the workbook once you reach that threshold. To be eligible to come in for your 3rd disbursement review, you'll need to have EOT'd 100% of your 1st tranche and 80% of your 2nd tranche. So we'll see that during the end of the demonstration here. The next section will show you your SETI expended information. So this is how you achieve your SETI incentive and receive that portion of your disbursement. So here you will see how much was expended in your 2nd or 3rd tranche requests. And then you'll also be able to see, these lines are specifically for SETI, and then these lines are for your total expended. To calculate your SETI expended percent, we will take the funds expended towards SETI businesses over your total expended, and that will get your percent expended for SETI owned businesses. And then down here, you'll see the total dollar amount that you need to expend, and then your SETI objective, and that will be calculated of what percent you're achieving of the SETI objective based on your expenditures to SETI owned businesses. So for each data element in the template, we do provide tooltips to help you understand the purpose and definition of that data element. You can hover over the data elements to read those tooltips. Tooltips will also be available in the column headers of all of the transaction tabs. But sometimes those can be difficult to read or just get cut off. So we also provide all of the tooltips In this tooltips page here, we'll detail the location of the data element, the name of the data element, if you have a drop-down list of responses to use or not, and then the description of that tooltip of the data element. All right, so I'll go ahead and move through some examples of how to enter transaction information in the disbursement request form. So as mentioned, this is an example where the participating jurisdiction is coming in for a third tranche request. So based on that, we will pre-populate your information from your second tranche request. So in this case here, you'll see that all of the prior transactions are included in this workbook. If you're only coming in for your second tranche review, then it will be completely blank for you. So it'll look something like this CAP Transactions tab. You'll enter your transaction information in these tabs based off of the program type. So CAP Transactions will be for the Capital Access Program. Loan credit will cover loan guarantees, loan participation programs, and then the VC equity for those VC programs. If you do not have a CAP program, for example, then you would just leave that tab completely blank. If you do not have any VC programs, you would just leave the VC tab blank and enter your transactions in the respective program tabs. So I'll walk through entering an example of a CAP transaction. You'll start here in the first column, which is the approved program name. This will be a customized drop-down list for each participating jurisdiction with the names of your program based on your application, your award, or any modifications that you've made. Again, if you don't have a program in this certain tab type, you won't see anything in the drop-down list. So you'll only be able to see programs relevant to this tab here. So I'll go ahead and select my program name, Capital Access Program, and you'll also see that column B here should be automatically populated with the program type. So you should never have to enter any information in column B. Column C is where you'll enter the name of the provider. This is just a free text entry, and you just want to make sure that the provider name is consistent with their legal entity name and anything that's listed on your transaction documentation. Column D is the unique transaction ID. So this is something that is generated by the participating jurisdiction. Any alphanumeric code to represent your transaction, it just needs to be unique. And please just make sure this is consistent with any annual reporting that you've done for these transactions as well. The disbursement date. So in the case of CAP transactions, these are all expended. So it is very straightforward. You can just enter the date that funds were disbursed. When we get to loan in VC, this date will be relative to the status of the transaction if it's expended, obligated, or transferred. Really the only requirement here, of course, is that this date be after your signed allocation agreement. The business name, again, just the name of the business. Please just be consistent with your documentation. And then here you'll need to enter the business EIN. So this will be a 9-digit EIN, same rules as the annual report. If you do not have an EIN for the business, just type out the letters SSN. We do not want to collect a social security number. Business state will be the location of the business. Typically, this is consistent with the location of the participating jurisdiction, but there is an allowance for a certain percentage of out-of-state or out-of-jurisdiction transactions. So please just select the appropriate business location there. And here you'll enter the business zip code. So where you just want the 5-digit zip code here. And please note that we will ensure that the reported zip code is within the reported state. We'll be doing a data validation check on that. The next couple columns here all relate to the purpose of the loan. So in primary purpose of the loan, you'll have a drop-down selection to choose from. You can select any of these options for the purpose of the loan. If you select any of them, you will leave column L blank. However, if you select other eligible use, you'll notice that column L becomes highlighted in red, indicating that you do need to provide an additional description of the use or purpose of the loan. Once you enter some data into that column, the red highlight will go away. And column N here is the secondary purpose of the loan. You can see in the column header, this says if applicable. So this is an optional column. If you do not have any secondary purpose to report, you are welcome to leave it blank. Once again, there is a drop-down option for you to select from here as well. Okay, column N and O cover the loan transaction amount and the SSBCI allocated funds expended. So these are highlighted in red and will be for any line in the workbook where you begin to enter transaction information. The purpose here is really just to draw your attention to these two columns. They're, sort of the most important part. Although many of the other data elements are also required within the disbursement request form. So please refer to other portions of the deck to make sure you have an understanding of what's included in the loan transaction and SSBCI funds expended. In the case of cap transactions, this is going to be the total loan amount excluding the SSBCI funds. So I'll go ahead and enter that here. Mayma, did you have something to add?
It's probably more valuable for the next tab, but I just want to flag what Grace said. If your loan and investment amount is doesn't have at a minimum the private capital at 20% private capital, that's a non-compliant transaction. So that means if you're not 1-to-1 when you submit this and this column N is red, that means that's a non-compliant transaction. So we cannot move forward with that transaction. So please keep that in mind to ensure when you enter your information in N and O, those items are not flagged red. So that's a validation issue. Thank you, Grace.
No problem, Emma. An additional validation that we'll perform at the cap transaction level is to ensure that this the SSBCI allocated funds expended is within the 2 to 7% range, which is part of the compliance requirements for these types of transactions. So you'll notice if I try to enter something that is outside of that range, I will receive a pop-up error indicating that the value of this number has to be less than or equal to 7%, greater than or equal to 2% of the loan transaction amount. You may be able to override this if you enter SSBCI allocated funds expended first. So please just note, we will still check on that once you submit your data. So please make sure that's within the allowable range. Right, so these next couple columns in the workbook regard SETI and BSB eligibility of the transactions. So column P here will be the number of full-time employees for the business. So you can see the calculation of how to come up with that number listed in the tooltip, and you can report that here. So we'll go ahead and say this business has 9 employees. In addition to reporting the FTE count, we will also ask that you indicate if this is a VSB or not. Business qualifies as VSB if it has less than 10 employees. So in this case, that will qualify as a VSB. One thing I'd like to note here is, let's say we are going to make a second transaction to this same business. This is allowable within the program as long as it's not for the exact same purpose. So we'll have another transaction out to them, just to keep it simple. In this case, we do not want you to report 9 FTEs again, because that would be double counting the number of employees across your entire transaction portfolio. In the case that you're providing multiple transactions to the same small business, please only report the delta, the change in their FTEs, if there is a change in FTEs. So if this small business did not add any additional employees, then you would report 0 here and still mark it as a VSB. However, let's say the small business gained 2 employees from your investment, you would report that change. So if they have 11 FTEs now, you would report the difference of 2 in the FTE column. Since the total size of the business is now above 10 employees, you would change this from yes to no. It's no longer a VSB. So it's perfectly acceptable to have a case where your initial investment counts towards VSB, but then a secondary investment occurs, the business has grown, and it's no longer a VSB. That's totally fine. Again, if you are, providing funding to the same small business on multiple transactions, only report the change in their FTEs. If there's no change, report 0. All right, moving on to the next section, which is this a SETI-owned business? Again, this is just a yes or no drop down. Go ahead and just say if it's SETI or not. If it is not SETI, you can skip over column S, leave that blank. If it is SETI, again, you'll notice this becomes highlighted in red, indicating that you need to provide information, and it is asking which of the 4 SETI categories qualifies this business as SETI owned. So all these first 3 would be information that you collected on the SETI certification. Again, please just make sure that your response here aligns with your documentation. If they qualify as SETI by this last item, being located in a CDFI investment area, in terms of documentation for your transaction, if it were to be sampled, please just have a screenshot of the business address on the CDFI investment area map. Okay, so these last couple columns are related specifically to CAP transactions, so you won't see these on the other tab, and this is just total borrower premiums and total lender premiums. We're just looking for the dollar amount here. So once you enter all of that information, that would be a completed transaction example for a CAP program. Before I move on to loan credit and VC equity, are there any questions? Okay, we'll move on to the loan credit program. So again, this template that I have on screen is an example where they're coming in for their third round of disbursement. So if you are coming in for that third round of funding, you will have already completed one disbursement review and will pre-populate all of your transactions that you reported during that review cycle. At this point in time, you'll want to update any of the information that might have changed. So if a transaction moved from obligated into expended, feel free to update that data element as well as the corresponding EOT date. If there, we don't typically expect to see, a change in business name or anything like that, but if you need to make a correction or if there, genuinely was a change in the business name, you can correct that at this point as well. All right. So I'll just go ahead through some of the additional data elements that are specific to the loan credit section. Mayma?
Yeah, Grace, let me just jump in. So for what Grace is highlighting, so if you have obligated transactions when you come in for your second tranche request and you come in your third, please make sure you review those obligations because we will look at any obligations that are old, anything that's over 6 months. We will anticipate those obligations should be closed. All the data elements that Grace highlighted will also be steady. So if a transaction was previously obligated or transferred and since changed to steady, so please also indicate that because you will get credit for that transaction that changed from obligated or transfer and now is a steady or VSD transaction. If there are, like Grace highlighted, if there are significant changes, so if the amounts are changing, we need to please notify us. So if there's a transaction you previously reported and you have some significant changes, please let us know. So we will know what amounts or what information is changing so we can have that on our side. So thank you, Grace. Appreciate it.
All right, so this is all very similar to what we went through on CAP. So I won't go through every single data element, but I do want to point out a few things that are specific to the loan credit programs. So in column A and B here, same thing. We just have our approved program name. Again, this will be a drop-down option for you to select from. Column B will be automatically populated with the corresponding program type according to your award documents. If you are selecting a LPP loan participation program for your transaction, you will need to indicate in column C here if this is a purchase participation or a companion loan type program. If you're entering an LGP, for example, loan guarantee, you can just leave column C blank. Similar to the CAP transaction tab, you will get that highlight information to let you know that LPPs require information in column C. Right, so provider name, again, this is the same for all your other transactions. Please refer to other portions of the deck to make sure that you understand when to provide the correct, or who is the correct provider to enter here. Again, for the companion loan, just make sure you're putting the provider of the private capital at risk. Unique transaction ID, whatever you'd like to enter to identify your transaction. And then here in column F, you'll have the expended, obligated, or transferred status. As a reminder, CAP transactions are all considered expended, but in the loan credit and VC equity tab, you'll have the opportunity to select from one of these 3 EOT types. So that being said, column G here, instead of only being the disbursement date, will be the date relative to the EOT status. So as you can see in the tooltip, if you put your transaction in a transferred status, this is going to be the date the funds were transferred. If your transaction is in an obligated status, the date the funds were committed. And if it is expended, then you'll have that disbursement date. We really only want one date to correspond with the current EOT status. So again, down the line, if you have a transaction changing from obligated to expended, you'll also need to update the date from the obligation date to the disbursement date. Business name, business EIN, business state, and zip code will all be similar across all of your tabs. Same thing goes for the primary purpose of the loan. Again, if you enter other, you'll need to provide a description of the other eligible use. Here you can see that secondary purpose of the loan, this was left blank. That's completely fine. This is optional. Loan transaction amount and the SSBCI allocated funds will be entered here. Again, as Mayma mentioned, make sure that you have the appropriate private capital at risk for your transactions. In column R here, you can also enter additional government funds. So this would be the dollar amount of funding from other public or government sources at the same time as the SSBCI supported loan or investment. That at the same time part is really critical. Otherwise, it would count as subsequent private financing. All right, and then the last few columns are again the same as you'll see across all of these tabs, the full-time equivalent employees and the very small business indicator, SETI indicator, as well as the type of SETI if it is a SETI-owned business. Again, just a reminder for multiple investments in the same business, report only the difference in FTEs. That does not necessarily affect their VSB status. What you report in the FTE column here can still be yes or no in VSB. Just please report only the change in the number of FTEs. All right, moving on to the VC equity tab. So again, in this case, we have our 2 or 3 different types of VC programs that you may enter here, equity capital programs, direct and funds, as well as the hybrid type programs will be entered in this tab. At this point, it should look very similar. You'll have your approved program name. A custom list of your programs will automatically populate your program type. Enter the appropriate provider. In the case of funds programs, it will be the fund. In the case of your direct programs, likely a contracted entity. Unique transaction ID, and then the EOT status. You can select from expended, obligated, or transferred. I guess just a note here is we don't typically see any transferred transactions in a funds type program. So you may get requests back from us if your data is entered that way. We would likely just, have you wait a day or two to have those transactions become expended. And then similarly, the EOT date should correspond with the EOT status. Business name, business EIN, business state, and zip code are all similar from the last few tabs, as well as the purpose of the investment, secondary purpose. You'll be able to report your investment transaction amount, SSBCI allocated funds, additional government funding if applicable. Again, this can be left blank if there is no additional government funding in that particular transaction. Full-time equivalent employees count, the SB indicator, SETI indicator, as well as the SETI status type. So in just a moment, I'm going to go through the VC Fund Workbook, which will explain this in more detail, but I just want to point out a couple things here. So if you do have a VC funds type program, we'll want you to report your obligation to the fund as well as all of your expended investments in the small businesses. Both of those movements of the funding will count towards your EOT status. So you can see in this case here, line 26, this is an obligation to the fund. So I actually mistyped a few of these. But for that obligation, as Raisa mentioned, obviously you're just obligating to the fund, so you don't have to enter any of the business information. Business name, business EIN, business state, and the zip code can all be left blank. As well as the primary purpose, secondary purpose can be left blank. We understand that that's just an obligation to the fund. You will need to enter the investment transaction amount and the SSBCI allocated funds. This one's pretty straightforward. This is, from the SSBCI funding, how much money went into the fund. The total investment transaction amount may include a couple additional items, and we'll discuss how you come up with all of these numbers appropriately in just another minute. Otherwise, for expended transactions out of the fund or any of your direct transactions, all of the standardly required business elements will be required for each transaction. And there are no specific data elements related to VC. Mima, did you have something to add?
Grace, I think Grace already mentioned this. We just want to flag also, if we see your VC tab and we only see obligated transactions in your programs, that means you did not expend. So just as a reminder, we want to see at a minimum 2 expanded transactions in the approved program within a 12-month period. So if we're just seeing obligations and no expanded transactions for any particular program, we will get back with you to make sure that you complete that, right? Because we cannot complete a disbursement request without having an expanded transaction in all SSBCI approved programs. So if your program does not have expanded transactions, do not include that program on here. If you have other programs that can get you to 80% with expanded obligated transactions, please report those programs. We will still ask you if you're fully positioned in those programs. That's not included in the disbursement request, but we just want to save you some time to remind everybody we are looking for at a minimum to expand the transaction in each of your programs that's included on this disbursement request. So thank you, Grace. I really appreciate you having me jump in.
No problem. Thank you, Mima. That's great clarification. All right, so that should cover all of your transaction information, cap transactions, line credit, and VC. Now we'll go briefly through administrative costs and VC fees. So scroll up to the top here so you can see the columns. For administrative costs, we'll be collecting the transaction date, the administrative expense, which is just a brief description, however you want to name that item. Column D here will indicate if the admin cost is for VC fund expenses. So this would not be your 171 fees, but any other cost that you have to pay to the fund. You would just mark that it is yes, this is a cost directed towards a VC fund. In this column here, you'll just need to indicate if this is a direct or indirect cost, and then the transaction amount of that administrative cost. Again, this is just an example of one where you'll be able to come in for your third tranche. So if you, of course, you'll have additional administrative transactions following your first disbursement review, just come down to the bottom of the list and start adding on new items. So both the VC indicator will have a drop down for you to select from, as well as the direct or indirect options. Same thing goes here. Administrative costs cannot be expended prior to the start of your countersigned agreement. And then just keep a note in mind that we will be checking against your administrative cost threshold. So if you're coming in for your second disbursement, you'll have to be under 5%. If you're coming in for your third disbursement, it would be 5% from the first tranche and 3% from the second tranche. And then, as Mayma mentioned, or Raisa mentioned in the deck, please do not include any administrative costs that were offset from program income. Last half of the workbook will be VC fund services to portfolio companies. So again, if you do not have a VC fund type program or a hybrid fund type program, you'll just leave this tab completely blank, ignore it. If you do have one of those programs, you'll see that in the drop-down list here. Again, just enter the name of the fund, that is the provider in this case, and the amount of fees that you have to pay out. Some little additional notes here just to help clarify things for you. And once you enter all of that information, you will see your cover page update with all of your transaction details, admin costs, fees, etc. And these EOT sections will become highlighted in green once you surpass your 80% threshold. You'll also be able to see your SETI objective information. So this was the case where we had a couple transactions that we marked as SETI, really just this one cap, one correct. So since that was 50% of all of our expended that we entered, that's above our objective, we'll receive 100% of that incentive funding. Any additional questions or comments before we move into the VC workbook? All right. So let me pull that up and we'll begin to walk through the workbook here. So as mentioned, you should be receiving this workbook if you have a VC fund type program. If you don't have a VC fund type program, you can check out for the next couple of minutes here. So you'll be able to use this workbook. It's completely optional, but we definitely understand that reporting the obligations versus expenditures in the disbursement request can be a little challenging. If you enter your transaction information in this template first, it will show you exactly what you should put in the disbursement request form. So I will walk through this. This is a completed example. It will come to you with the example included, as well as blank tabs for you to fill this out for yourself. So you'll start by entering the name of your fund, just so you can see that that will map over to the provider column here, as well as the target fund size. So the total fund size. This will be the total VC commitments closed, private plus SSBCI entered here. And then you'll also want to include the SSBCI allocated amount that's coming into the fund. And that will show you the SSBCI allocated percent of private commitments. So in this case, SSBCI, or your participating jurisdiction based on the SSBCI contributions, has 50% of the funds. So you'll see that 50% investment rate carried out across the rest of the workbook, across the administrative expenses, as well as the fees. And that is really how you can make sure that you're entering this information correctly. So your percent commitment amount should be consistent across all of these different varieties of transactions. So that is essentially the details of the overall fund. Then you'll begin to make investments in small businesses. The fund will begin to make investments in small businesses. So column A here, you'll enter the transaction date of that investment. Column B will be the name of the small business who's receiving the funding. And then I'll go through each of these here. So column A will be the VC fund investment in the business. Column B will be only the SSBCI portion. Again, column A, column B, this is how you're going to get that 50% commitment. Column C will cover any other private capital that is happening in that same round of funding. And then here you have what equates to your investment transaction amount. So in the case of Sarah's Market, we have the VC fund investing $100,000, 50,000 of which was the SSBCI allocated funds. There's also additional $200,000 in the round. So you're coming to a total transaction investment amount of $300,000, which would be the VC fund investment plus the other private capital. If we move over to the right side of the workbook here and look at Sarah's Market, you'll see this should look, like the disbursement request form. Your investment transaction amount, that total investment transaction, is the $300,000. So the VC fund commitment as well as the other private capital. And then the SSBCI allocated funds is the $50,000. So you won't see your percent of participation in the fund necessarily reflected on your disbursement request form. But if you use this workbook here, you'll be able to see how that 50% commitment is working out here. So you'll want to enter all of the transactions or expenditures into small businesses here. Again, filling out the investment from the VC fund, from SSBCI, from other private capital to help you calculate your investment transaction amount. I do want to note, of course, while you'll have your same level of commitment from the fund and from SSBCI, again, at 50% or 33 or 20 or whatever your commitment level is, there could be differences in the other private capital in the round. So 200,000, 350, 500,000. Of course, this can vary and it does not affect that commitment percentage. All right, so similarly, for administrative expenses, you'll have your VC admin expenses, and then based on your percent commitment into the fund, you'll have 50% of that, in this case, so $50. The total VC admin expense, but you'll only put that $50 on your admin tab of your disbursement request form. Again, similarly here, the total VC fund management fees, the 171 fees at $100, but due to the 50% investment from SSBCI, you'll have only $50 reflected here. So how does this help you enter your obligation information? That's really the question. So we just talked through how to enter all of your expenditures. The trickier part is understanding this obligation. So at the top here, right, we discussed how you made that $500,000 commitment obligation to the fund. You'll need to back out all of the expenditures from that. So down at the bottom here, you can see how that works. So on the fund side and then on the SSBCI side here. So total commitment of the fund, $1 million. And then SSBCI at the 500,000. So in this line here, we have all of the expended VC commitments. So this is the sum of number one above here, right? All of this VC in column C, both from your expended transactions, admin, as well as the management fees. So that comes to $300,000. So 1 million minus 500,300 gets you your 499,700. And that is what will go here in the investment transaction amount for your obligation to the VC fund. Very similarly, we'll take a look at how we get that SSBCI allocated fund number. We have the 500,000 that SSBCI put into the fund, minus the sum of all of the SSBCI expenditures. Again, looking at column D for your transactions, for your administrative expenses, and for your fees. That'll come to $250,150. When you subtract that from the 500,000 commitment, you get $249,850, which is what will be reported here in the SSBCI allocated funds for your obligation line. Right. Any questions on this? Or any comments from Emma or Carl?
We know this is new, so I know Grace is just going through it for the first time. So if any questions come up, please feel free to ping us. We can jump on a call to assist in you understanding this document. Again, this is optional. We're just hoping it will help you provide clean data as you report on VC fund transactions. So thank you so much, Grace.
Yep, and then I guess just one more comment. If you've previously reported during a second or during your initial disbursement review for your second tranche of funding, then you come back in for your second disbursement review to receive that third tranche of funding. Of course, you'll need to further reduce your obligations based on your new expenditures. Right, so that will conclude my portion today, and I'll go ahead and pass it off to Jay, who will be showing the portal. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. Before we get started, I'm going to hold this line open for another minute if there are any questions that pop up. And while we wait for my test environment to load up, I'm going to share a link to the portal. And I encourage that anyone that is new to logging into the portal or hasn't logged into the portal in a while, just go ahead and click on either one of the links to make sure that your access is still valid. And if you have any problems, please let us know during this meeting, or you can reach out to the SSBCI_information at treasury.gov email. And please include your outreach manager on that communication if you're having any issues logging into the portal. So give about 30 seconds or 40 seconds for this to load up. And again, if you have any questions off of anything that has been previously discussed, please come off mute and ask those questions now. All right, doesn't look like we have any questions, and my portal has loaded very quickly this evening, so it's going to be a good demo for all. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And the two links inside of the portal, they all eventually get to the same place. But that top link that has cares/s with a backslash or a slash will take you over to what you're seeing on the screen now. So if you see up in the URL has CARES Act/S/ it takes you to the splash screen or the area where you can select any of the CARES Act programs. And you'll notice the URL is going to switch when I click on the SSBCI program. It's going to switch over to that second link that's inside of the chat that has the SSBCI-home-page. Once you're logged in, you're going to come over to the left navigation area and you're going to click Capital Program Disbursement Requests. And once you're here, you will see your disbursement requests inside of this table here. Again, this is my test environment, so there are all multiples here. But if it's coming up for your second tranche, you will see one line that will have second tranche, and your third subsequent tranche will also pop up when you're ready for your third tranche. You'll come over to the blue pencil icon, which is the edit icon, and that will enter inside of the capital disbursement request. And just to show you a little bit about the navigation of the capital disbursement request is you're going to have a left-hand navigation where you can go from section to section. And then towards the bottom, you're also going to have a back button or a back and a next button to get to the previous section or the next section. More on the right-hand side, we have a widget that is sticky, so it will be here regardless of what section that you select on the left-hand nav or the back and next button. And this basically is just verifying that you are your jurisdiction here. So we're going to come back to section 1, which is the user instructions. So we ask that you just read this, and it gives a little bit of information about the different tranches and some other information. It also has a link to the capital disbursement request form user guide. So you can click that link if you have any questions about submitting in the portal. You can use this here. Moving over to the next section, the section 2 is the capital request, and this is where the participating jurisdiction information is. So again, this is my test environment, so there's some test data here, but you will have your implementing entity information here. And we ask that you verify to make sure that is correct. And if you have any issues with what's presented here, please let us know through the SSBCI_information box. And again, CC your outreach manager on that communication. And scrolling down, we have an area where we have contacts. We realize there may be certain people in your organization or in your jurisdiction that may be responsible for submitting these disbursement requests. So we give the ability for you to see who is on your account, and we also give the ability to add new contacts to your account. The word page over here is highlighted in blue as a hyperlink. So once we click on page, it is going to take us over to the COVID-19 Relief Hub. And once you're in here, you can read the roles and see what they are, and I'll go over them in a second. But you also have an area where the first thing that you're going to do, if it's the first time adding an individual, you will need to click certification and then put your name in here as it is when you're logging in, and then click submit. And then once that is, then you will have the designation form to which you can add new contacts or you can edit existing contacts. So adding a new contact, you click this button here, and then you add all the information for the individual that you want to add for access to the portal. And then you will select your different roles that you would like that individual to have. So for each one of the programs, you'll see it with prefix of SSBCI Capital, SSBCI TA, and there's another one for SSBCI SBOT. So the the different roles that we have inside is going to be the account admin, which Raisa mentioned a little earlier, which is the most restrictive, where you're able to view and download everything inside of the portal. And then you also have the account POC, which they can view, download, and upload the disbursement requests. And then you have the authorized representative role. Authorized representative role can do everything inside of the portal, meaning they can view, download, upload, and submit and certify the disbursement request. So once you have your role selected, you just add new contact. And then once you do that, it adds it to the table that we previously saw inside of the disbursement request. One thing I would just advise is that if this is a new individual has never signed into the portal, we ask that you add that new contact first before they even click the link to go into the portal, because they are going to need to complete ID.me in order to validate their identity, which would allow access to the portal. When you're adding users, there are no limit to the amount of people that you can add, and there are no limits to the amounts of roles that the different people can have. So you can have up to, you can have 20 people in here as a contact, and all 20 of them can have the authorized representative role as an example. So there are no limits either way. So after you add those new contacts, we are going to jump back to the disbursement request, and we are on section 2, and that new contact will show up in the contacts table here. Move into section 3, which is the Excel upload section. So again, we have some information here. We advise that you read everything that is presented here. And once you've read everything here, then you can scroll down, and here is where you can download the disbursement request form for you to fill out. Once you have your disbursement request form filled out, you can upload it by clicking Upload Files here. It's going to open up in an Explorer dialog box. And then you go over to where you have your document saved. And then you can click and upload that file inside of the portal. Once that file is uploaded, you'll get a blue Done button. You click Done, and that document will drop down inside of the table below. Once you have that file here, the Upload Files button is going to be grayed out because we only need one record here. And if you've made a mistake in uploading that, you can click the box right next to the file name and then click Delete Files. So once you have your record uploaded inside of the portal, you simply come over to section 4, and this is the area where you're going to certify and submit. And please read this paragraph carefully, because when you submit your disbursement request, a DocuSign form is going to go to the authorized official listed on the capital application. And we just want to make sure that this email address for that authorized official on the application is correct, and that person is accessible for this this email address. So once you verify the authorized official email address is correct, and I always advise to copy your name from here, paste it into the white open box. And I say copy and paste because this dialog box is case and space sensitive. So you see I change that to a lowercase s. If I hit clear, certify and submit, it is going to get an error. It will not let you submit unless it is exactly how it's printed your name here. So I'll click that back to a capital S, and then I'll click certify and submit. You'll get a green application completed and DocuSign envelope sent confirmation. And you'll also get a confirmation over here in the blue box saying that your disbursement request has been submitted. It gives the disbursement request number, your jurisdiction, who submitted, and the date everything was submitted. The status within inside of the portal will say e-signature pending until this authorized official goes into their inbox and clicks on that DocuSign and finishes signing the DocuSign, and that will reroute it back to us, and then this would change to submitted. So again, clicking certify and submit inside the portal is not the last step. This authorized official will need to go in to their inbox and find that email and then finish the DocuSign. We've had reports that sometimes the authorized official does not receive it. There are some times where the email will go to a spam box or junk mail. We suggest that you check that if you're not seeing it inside your regular inbox. And with that, that was the end of the demo, and I'll hand it over to Samari.
Thank you, Jay.
Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me? This is Samari, and I'll be walking you through the next couple of slides. So the first is key disbursement information. Based upon previously completed disbursement request reviews, we have identified a couple of best practices that we encourage you all to keep in mind as you prepare for the disbursement request. So we recommend that you have a secure file transfer method to send supporting documentation to SSBCI. What's worked best for us is a Dropbox of some sort that compliance may access during our review. Please note that the SSBCI staff only need temporary access to supporting documents, so access should be removed once the disbursement request process has been completed. If a file happens to be password protected, please remember to provide that password, and also make sure that the file detail is legible and the file is complete, etc. As a reminder, if you submit items with redacted content, we will request access to that redacted content and information if we need to. So keep that in mind. Ensure that you provide and review all necessary certifications, loan and investment documentation, commitment letters, and relevant transaction details, and review documentation for prohibited terms and limits for all SSBCI transaction types. As you know, the application that was approved for your jurisdiction's participation in the SSBCI capital program is also part of your allocation agreement. So when we sample the transactions reported on your disbursement request form, we also ensure that the elements of the disbursement request form are aligned with the language in your application. So that is pretty much that. Okay. So we're on to the study detail and the study information also. So the study detail and study information, as you can see right here, there are different categories of study detail. There is the category 1 through 3, which actually requires a certification, and there's also category 4. Category 4, just make certain that you retain the information needed to support the designation of that category. And that is usually a screenshot of some sort to verify that the current business is located in the CDFI area. All right, that was a lot, but next slide, please. Oh, actually, let's go back to the previous slide, if you don't mind. I want to talk through a couple of other things, just for good measure. Just as a reminder, transaction information reported on the DRF, it should reconcile to the annual report. And what we mean by that is things like the disbursement date, the total amount, FTEs, the study designation, those things that are reported on the DRF should pretty much align with the annual report. And, you know, there is an element in this last bullet point that we call out, and we're only calling it out just as a reminder that one loan cannot be enrolled in more than one approved program at the same time. A lender may not divide one loan into multiple agreements or notes, and each have to be enrolled in, if they're enrolled, they have to be enrolled for a different business purpose. So now we can move on to the next slide. And thank you, Grace. All right, so here are a few things that we have a couple of minimum protection standards that we just wanted to bring to your attention that we also review for as a part of our disbursement request review. And we would ask that you also do the same. Just ensure upfront fees or charges paid by the small business, excluding fees paid to the program, do not exceed 3% for loans greater than $25,000 it cannot exceed 3% for loans greater than $25,000. Confessions of judgment, we have here please confirm that the SSBCI supported transactions do not include contract clauses requiring confessions of judgment that take away a small business's borrower's legal defense rights and rights to due process. We do mention the NCUA cap here, which is currently 18%. We do review to ensure that the interest rates on for the transactions, for loan transactions, do not exceed the NCUA cap. And also, we also have noted here the prepayment of fees. And as a reminder, loans with an original principal amount of under $100,000, lenders may not include prepayment fees. For loans with an original principal amount of $100,000 or more, lenders may include prepayment fees so long as any such fees are reasonable, customary, and clearly disclosed to the borrower. And so we also have this element that we always like to call out relating to the one-to-one financing. And the one-to-one financing ratio is required for each individual OSCP and must be met at the program level in the case of fund investment programs. And a one-to-one financing ratio is met at the transaction level. At the program level for also for both investment programs, actually, for the fund investment programs. Stumbled a little bit. Now, we'll talk about the single transaction and multiple drawdowns. The SSBCI supported line of credit or loan that has closed with multiple draws. SSBCI funds have to be dispersed to the lender. The jurisdiction should report the full amount of both the lender and the SSBCI allocated funds expended under loan transaction amount, and the full amount of the SSBCI portion of the line of credit note under the SSBCI allocated funds expended. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, Grace. Okay. All right. Key disbursement information for equity VC programs. The OSCP one-to-one financing requirement for SSBCI fund investment must be met at the venture capital fund level. Specifically, private investment in specific funds must be equal to or greater than the SSBCI investment in that fund. For a direct investment, the one-to-one must be met at the program level. The private capital must be pari passu with or junior to the SSBCI investment to comply with capital at risk requirements for equity investors. And SSBCI funds must be used to pay for support up to an annual of 1.71% to a venture capital fund over the life of the program and must annually certify that these services were provided. And I think that's pretty much the gist. Just as a reminder, the agreement between the fund and the portfolio company should include the identification of the services to be provided to portfolio companies and disclosure of these services offered by the portfolio company's fund manager. And that's for the 171 fees. Next slide, please. Disbursement best practices. Okay, so generally speaking, we review to ensure that the transaction is compliant, and that would involve making certain that a loan is up to for an eligible business purpose and to an eligible borrower. And that information should be supported by the documentation that is provided. So in the disbursement request form, usually there's a primary and secondary business purpose that identifies the business purpose for the transaction. We ask for supporting documentation that corroborates that business purpose. Also, ensure that supporting documentation does not include prohibited terms, like, for example, goodwill or confessions of judgment, which we talked about earlier under the minimum protection standards. Ensure that supporting documentation clearly identifies the private lenders. That is, if there are multiple sources of private capital, please differentiate those lenders that are associated with the SSBCI loan. Review supporting loan and investment documentation to ensure that it is complete and that all that has been provided has been asked for and that they are all in compliance. Review the lender and investor documentation for prohibited terms and for all of the SSBCI transaction types. And please remember to not include concurrent private financing in the total loan or investment amount. The FEEs that are reported in the disbursement request form, we agree that to supporting documentation, so ensure that that supporting documentation is provided. And if there are multiple loans or investments to one business, this was talked about earlier, jurisdictions should not double count the number of FTEs or the other borrower investment level data. So next slide, please. This is an item, this is a not comprehensive list of some of the documents that we request when we review transaction types. And so this slide goes into some of the documents that we'll ask for loan transactions. And as you read through it, I'm going to talk through kind of why we are asking for some of these things, because we've run into, perhaps you may not have what we're asking for. But the overall gist of this review is we review and we try to corroborate the information that's documented in the disbursement request form. So we have noticed that, let's say for a borrower's application, that may be a source that may document the borrower's address to make certain that it is within jurisdiction. The borrower's application may be a source that identifies the FTEs, or even the business purpose of the transaction. However, some jurisdictions have said and have come back and said, we don't have a borrower application. It would be generally whatever the intake form is, or whatever supporting documentation would be. It could be a memo of some sort, it can be some other type of review or form of intake form that identifies those elements relating to the borrower that is reported in the disbursement request form that we corroborate through your supporting documentation. So that is the reason why we ask for some of these. Each one of these we can go through, or you can read at a pretty much high level, but we're looking for documentation, that supports when funds were dispersed. That may be a wire, or that may be a bank statement. We're going to look for, and that would corroborate the date of a transaction was expended. And so this list, although it's here, it may vary based upon what these documents are, may vary based upon what your jurisdiction does. But the overall point is that we're asking for documentation that corroborates these elements of the disbursement request form. I'm going to go through. I'm being told to wrap it up, guys. So I realize the time is coming up. So let's go through the next ones quickly. Next slide, please. Same thing, EPCOC, this is an element that pretty much, these are all the items in the guidelines specifically that are required for that exception for EPCOC transactions. So this is pretty prescriptive and it's very clear. So we would be a lease agreement, we want to see guarantors, guarantees, we'd want to see certifications signed by the EPC and OC. This is pretty much prescriptive, because it is required through the guidelines. So next slide, please. VC transactions. Similar to the loan transactions, the concept is the same. We're asking for documents that corroborate elements within the disbursement request form. So the investment amount, the capitalization table in particular, I'm going to call that out in the interest of time, because that is an element that we do a review for, also for, as we review for COI and conflicts of interest. So we would need the capitalization table. And as I mentioned earlier, if there are elements of this capitalization table that are redacted, we do require, or we do rely on the capitalization table to perform our own reviews of conflicts of interest. So we would reach out to the jurisdiction regarding that element. But these are the items that they're not prescriptive, but they cover the gist of the idea. That this is what we would request to test the elements of the disbursement request form. So next slide, please. Oh, I wrapped it up, Mayma. I did it. I'm turning it over to Mayma.
Thank you, Samari. Like Samari stated, those slides that the last two slides she presented, those are not comprehensive, but the key here is we want to be able to trace the program requirements, testing for COI, testing for eligibility, like Raisa highlighted, making sure you don't have any prohibited terms in your transactions. Those are some of the things we will look at. So once again, I'm just going to remind everybody, compliance is a sample of the transaction you're going to submit to us. So we're not looking at your full population. We're going to perform a sample. Once we select that sample, we will send out an email that would highlight all the different files we need for those corresponding transactions. So please keep that in mind. I know some folks have gone through this process with us, so hopefully you are adopting some of the best practices for the folks that have gone through the second tranche review, to also make sure that you implement that in the next round, which will expedite our review of your third tranche. We have some other items, but we're going to save to share via the deck. So please look out. You will get a deck and this video recording for this session sometime this week, end of this week or early next week. We hope you can use this information to either retrain yourself or new staff, and just want to put emphasis on we are here, we are available to help you. So before you submit incomplete data to us, jump on a call with us, work with your outreach manager, because our goal is to, generally we try to complete disbursement requests within a 90-day period, and that is all contingent on receiving that clean disbursement package, like Raisa highlighted, the completed data, valid data for disbursement request, your form, your disbursement request form, your execution of your NXA, which is done via DocuSign. Also, we want to make sure we have supporting documentation. So we don't start the clock on your disbursement until we receive all those three information. So just keep that in mind. We will encourage folks, as we outline in the Capital International Compliance Standards, do a review of your transactions at a minimum on a quarterly basis. Do not send us transactions that are not compliant. It's really, really going to hold up your process, and it's going to cause more issues. So please keep that in mind. Make sure your documentations are clean, make sure things are traceable. Please do not send us draft documents. We want to see the final documents that support your transactions. And again, the worksheet that we are sharing, we're hoping you can utilize that to make sure you're submitting clean accounting for your VC fund transactions. And if you want any help from us, please work through your outreach manager. We appreciate everybody's time today. We will continue to hold these quarterly reporting training sessions related to disbursement. So hopefully our next one will be out sometime in Q4. We are still monitoring folks that are coming in, and we're monitoring your EOT percentage as well. So I will stop talking there. I know we have a lot of questions in the chat. Hopefully we did answer as many as possible. We will take these questions back with us and incorporate them in our next round of training. For those folks that did not submit any questions, please go through and review this material and come back to us with any questions. And again, thank you for your time. Thank you, Samari. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Grace. And thank you, Raisa, for your support on this process. And thank you, everybody, for making time with us today. And we look forward to continue to work with you, and are excited. And thank you, everybody, for your timely submission of the Q2 reports, which were due yesterday. So thank you so much. Have a nice day. Thank you. And if you have any questions, I can stick around for a couple more minutes, so you can come off mute. Sorry, we did not reserve extra time for questions. Okay, it seems like nobody has questions, so thank you for your time.